The winter did not knock before entering. It arrived like a verdict already passed, final and unappealable. Snow fell for 3 relentless days, erasing sound, color, and choice, until the world itself seemed to hold its breath. By the time the storm slowed, the town beneath it had been pressed flat and silent, as if waiting to see who would still be standing when the cold decided to look away. That morning, Mariah Ellison appeared on the main road as a dark slash against the white. She leaned forward into the wind, pushing a 2-wheeled wooden cart whose rims were locked deep into ice. Each step brought a brief slide, a pause to steady herself, then another push forward. On the cart lay her son Jonas, drawn inward beneath a coat worn thin at the cuffs. Mariah stopped long enough to pull the fabric tighter around his shoulders, drawing it up to his chin. She wrapped him twice, carefully, while leaving her own back and shoulders bare to the cutting air. The wool scarf she'd started with had slipped loose somewhere behind her, fluttering like something trying to escape. Her breath came out in pale, uneven clouds. Her hands were cracked raw, fingers numb, gripping the handle until her knuckles blanched white. "Are you tired, Mama?" Jonas asked softly. His voice was small and unsure, as though even speaking might disturb the frozen road beneath them. Mariah bent slightly to meet his eyes. Her face was tight with cold, cheeks red not with warmth but with damage. She did not answer right away. "Are you cold?" she asked instead. Jonas shook his head too fast, a clumsy lie born of fear more than courage. She adjusted his coat again and resumed pushing, saying nothing more. At the far end of the street, beneath the sagging porch of an abandoned house, Ronan Cade had been standing for some time. Snow clung to his beard and the brim of his hat, settling into the seams of his heavy coat. He had seen Mariah the moment she turned onto the main road, seen how she leaned into the weight, how she did not complain, how everything about her was pulled taut, like a rope stretched far beyond comfort but not yet snapped. When Jonas coughed once, barely audible, Ronan stepped down from the porch. He moved quickly, though not in haste. The distance closed in a handful of long strides. Mariah sensed him before she heard boots on snow. She stopped at once, her grip tightening. Ronan halted beside the cart, shrugged his coat from his shoulders, and held it out to her. "You'll freeze," he said. His voice was low and plain, stripped of comfort or persuasion. "Put it on." Mariah looked at the coat. Then she looked at him, eyes dark, sharp, colder than the air between them. "I don't need charity." The words were slow and measured. No raised voice, no apology. Ronan stood still for one heartbeat. His mouth opened, then closed. Jonas slid from the cart, his boots sinking into the snow. He tugged gently at his mother's hand, as if afraid she might break. "Mama," he said with a seriousness that didn't belong to his age, "if you get sick, I don't know what I'll do." The road fell silent. No one stared openly, but Mariah felt eyes behind frost-clouded windows. She straightened her back, as though bending even slightly would allow the weight of the world to settle there permanently. Ronan said nothing more. He stepped past them and laid the coat neatly on a nearby woodpile, as if returning something that had never been his to give. Then he turned away. He did not look back. Mariah stood still for a long moment. The wind cut across her bare shoulders, drawing a shiver from her, but she did not move. Her hands remained numb, yet somewhere deep in her chest something shifted, not softened, just no longer whole in the way it had been before. She watched his back disappear into the falling snow and wondered, for the first time in many years, whether every act of help was an insult, or whether she had lived in the cold so long, she no longer remembered what warmth was meant to feel like. The snow continued to fall, slow and heavy, entirely unconcerned with the answer. That afternoon the snowfall thinned, not from kindness, but from exhaustion. Mariah pulled the cart toward the small house at the forest's edge, where dark trunks stood like silent sentinels. She stepped into the yard, lowered her head against the wind, then stopped short. Smoke rose from the chimney. Not much, just a thin, steady thread. Her hand tightened on the cart handle. Her heart missed a single beat. She remembered the morning she had left, the way the stove refused to draw, smoke spilling back into the room until she'd put the fire out completely rather than risk it. "Mama," Jonas said, excitement lifting his voice. "Our house has smoke." She did not answer. She moved faster and pushed the door open with her shoulder. Warmth struck her face before scent followed. Not the choking smoke she knew, but clean-burning wood even and sure. The stove glowed with a steady fire. A section of the chimney had been replaced. Joints sealed with dried mud, careful and precise. Beside the stove lay split firewood, stacked neatly and bound with rope. Jonas jumped down and ran to the stove. "Mama, it doesn't smoke anymore." He reached out, then pulled his hand back from the heat. Who did this? Mariah closed the door behind them and stood without moving. Her eyes scanned the room. Nothing disturbed. Everything in place, even tidier than before. She knelt by the stove and set her palm against the lowest brick, still warm. Her fingers curled slightly, an old reflex, as if warmth was something she could borrow only briefly. "Someone kind came by," Jonas said with certainty. "Probably the man from before." Mariah stood at once. "We don't know that," she said, clipped and firm. "No one does things without a reason." Jonas looked confused but did not argue. Mariah fed the fire with practiced speed, keeping her hands busy as if motion alone could hold her thoughts in place. That night Jonas slept better than usual. No coughing, no restless turning. Mariah sat at the table, mending the frayed edge of his coat beneath the oil lamp. She listened to the wind tap, the roof, and to the unfamiliar quiet of a room. Warmed without effort. By morning, footprints marked the snow, leading from the forest to her door and back again. Long strides, certain, she watched them, then brushed snow over the print nearest the threshold, erasing something she was not ready to face. By afternoon, there came a single knock. Mariah opened the door slowly. Ronan stood one step back from the threshold, coat fastened, hands empty. "I just wanted to make sure the stove was working," he said. He did not look inside. The old chimney had gaps. East wind would have pushed smoke back. "I didn't ask," she replied. "I know." Silence settled, dense but not sharp. Jonas peeked around her. "Sir," he said, "our stove is very warm." Ronan bent slightly to meet the boy's eyes. "That's good." Mariah realized then it wasn't the help that unsettled her, but the way he refused to make it mean more than it was. "What's your name?" she asked. Ronan shook his head lightly. "Not important." He stepped back, giving the doorway back to her, then turned away. She closed the door and rested her forehead against the wood for a brief, unconscious second. Morning came slow and pale. Mariah finished the last potato as Jonas stood, hesitated, then took a carrot from the basket. "Mama," he said solemnly, "I want to take this to the man." She wiped her hands, added bread, wrapped both in cloth, and placed the bundle in his hands without comment. They followed the narrow path uphill. Ronan's cabin emerged among the trees. Mariah stopped at the edge of the yard. Jonas stepped forward. Ronan opened the door almost at once. Jonas offered the bundle. "Thank you for fixing our stove." Ronan took it carefully. "Thank you," he said. "What's your name?" "Jonas." "And yours?" Ronan glanced to Mariah. She did not move. "Ronan," he said. Mariah stepped one pace closer. "We won't stay," she said. "I know." Jonas whispered, "Mama, Ronan is good." She did not correct him. They left. Meals followed, quiet and brief. Ronan kept distance by choice, not fear. Mariah noticed. One night, Jonas fell asleep at the table. When Mariah returned from laying him down, Ronan had moved the chair aside and tended the fire. "You don't have to," she began. "I know," he replied. That night she sat by her own. Stove and understood that safety offered, without demand, was the most dangerous kind of comfort. When whispers began in town, she heard them without turning. When they reached Jonas, she knelt before him and told him the truth. They had done nothing wrong. That night she returned Ronan's things. He accepted without protest. Distance followed. Then the storm came hard and fast. Ronan did not think long. He went to them. He stayed the night. No promises were made. Morning came, and something quiet, unspoken, remained. The days that followed did not announce themselves as change. They arrived quietly, almost cautiously, as if testing whether they were welcome. Meals began to appear between Mariah and Ronan without ceremony, slipping into their lives like pauses that no one rushed to fill. No one named them habits, yet they returned often enough to become something dependable. The first was a late midday meal when Mariah carried a pot of thin soup. steam lifting from beneath the lid. Jonas walked ahead of her, holding the wooden cover as if guarding a secret. Ronan opened the door and stepped back one measured pace, leaving the threshold untouched. Mariah entered, set the pot on the table and kept her coat on. They ate with few words. Spoons touched bowls softly. Jonas spoke more than both of them combined, telling stories about the night's snow, a loose nail in the chair, a small bird that had landed on the fence and flown away. Ronan listened, nodding when needed. Mariah watched her son, sometimes reaching out to straighten his sleeve. Each time she leaned forward, Ronan subtly shifted his chair back just enough to keep space between them. The later meals followed the same pattern. Sometimes early, frost still clinging to the windows. Sometimes late, fire low, wind cutting across the porch. Jonas was always present, an unspoken rule that never needed voicing. Ronan never sat too close. When he passed a cup, he set it down rather than placing it in Mariah's hand. When he adjusted Jonas's chair, he stood at an angle so Mariah could see every motion. When he added wood to the fire, he turned his back, the crackle steady as breath. Mariah noticed it before she could name it. His care was not hesitation but intention. He kept boundaries not from fear of crossing them, but from respect for the ones she needed. There were moments when their eyes met and lingered a second too long. Not searching, not inviting, just acknowledging shared warmth in the same room. Mariah was usually the first to look away, bending to gather dishes or wiping her hands as if motion alone could slow her heart. And each time she felt Ronan's gaze rest lightly at her shoulder, not pressing, not asking. Once Jonas fell asleep at the table, head slumped against his arm. Mariah carried him to the back room. When she returned, Ronan had moved Jonas's chair against the wall, leaving open space at the table, and was feeding the fire. "You don't have to," she began, then stopped. "I know," Ronan said quietly. "But the fire was dying," she nodded. That was all. That night, at home, Mariah sat long beside her own stove, palm near the embers, feeling warmth ease slowly into her skin. This safety came without surprise. It was not the kind she had learned to avoid. It felt like a room without a locked door, where staying or leaving were equal choices. And that frightened her because once safety becomes familiar, it becomes the thing one fears losing most. The next day, during another simple meal of bread and warm water, Jonas dropped his spoon. Ronan bent to retrieve it at the same moment Mariah did. Their hands halted within a breath of each other. No contact. Close enough for Mariah to feel the warmth of his skin, softer than fire, unmistakably alive. Ronan drew his hand back first, set the spoon on the table and stepped away. "Sorry," he said as though the fault were his. Mariah straightened and for once did not turn aside. In that instant she understood what unsettled her most. It was not closeness but restraint. Ronan could step forward, yet he chose not to. That choice made everything just safe enough and just dangerous enough. When they parted, Jonas held Mariah's hand as they walked home, somewhere behind them. She knew Ronan remained standing a moment longer as he always did. No calling, no following, close but never forcing. Winter did not bring only cold. It brought whispers. Mariah first heard them at the back, counter of the general store, while waiting to trade for a small sack of flour. Two women ahead spoke without turning. They did not say her name. They did not need to. "A widow has to live," one murmured. "But going up the mountain all the time, taking the boy—" The other gave a thin laugh. "That man's lived alone for years. You never know." Mariah set her coin on the counter. Her hand did not shake. She took the flour and stepped outside, pulling her collar up, not for warmth. By afternoon, the whispers reached closer. Jonas sat on the porch, arranging bits of wood. When Mariah entered the yard, he looked up, then hesitated. "Mama," he said, then stopped. The lady at the store said, "I shouldn't go up the mountain anymore." Mariah halted. "What did she say?" Her tone surprised even her with its calm. Jonas lowered his head. "She said people would talk about you." Mariah knelt, placed both hands on his shoulders, and met his eyes. "You did nothing wrong," she said. "Neither did I." That night she opened the old wooden chest and took out things that were not necessary, a length of rope, a patch of mending cloth, the small knife Ronan had returned after fixing the door. She folded them neatly into a cloth bag. No hurry, no hesitation. The next morning, she took the path uphill alone. Ronan opened the door and stood at the threshold as always. "I'm returning these," she said, holding out the bag. Ronan took it and did not argue. "If that's what you want," she nodded. "I don't want my son growing up with words that don't belong to him." "All right, one word, enough." He stepped back a pace, leaving the space open. She turned away before she could reconsider. Distance followed. Meals disappeared. The path showed no new tracks. Smoke still rose from Ronan's chimney, but it no longer felt near. Jonas asked once, "When will we see Ronan again?" "We're busy," Mariah said. "Not a lie, just not the whole truth." Ronan did not come looking. He accepted the distance like weather. That acceptance made breathing harder than any argument would have. At night, the house was quiet but colder, even with the fire burning. Mariah understood then that some distances are kept not for pride, but to hide fear of being seen. The storm arrived without warning, snow driving sideways, wind tearing through the trees like something awakened too suddenly. Ronan felt it shift and thought of one image that would not leave him. Mariah pushing the cart, Jonas curled beneath a thin coat. He pulled on his coat, led the horse by hand, and stepped into the white. By the time he reached Mariah's roof, snow layered his shoulders. He knocked once. The door opened immediately. Mariah stood there, hair loose, lamplight lifting a tired, alert face. "Come in," she said. Ronan stepped inside. The stove was lit. She took his coat, hung it to dry, and laid a blanket over his shoulders with practiced ease. Jonas stumbled out, rubbed his eyes, and climbed straight into Ronan's arms, as if that place had always existed. Ronan carried him to bed, movements careful and unhurried. When he returned, only the two of them remained. "You didn't need to risk it," Mariah said softly. "We were fine." "I know," Ronan replied. "But storms don't care what we know." Silence opened, gentle but deep. Mariah spoke of widowhood, of learning not to ask, of fearing kindness might teach Jonas doubt. Ronan spoke of winters alone, of learning not to arrive late. He reached out and rested his hand on the back of hers, not holding, just touching. She did not pull away. They sat closer, the fire keeping time. Morning came pale and quiet. Ronan rose first, pulled on his dry coat. Mariah handed him a scarf and adjusted his collar briefly. They named nothing. "The road's slick," she said. "I'll take it slow." Jonas asked if he would return. "If needed," Ronan said. When he left, the house was quiet but not cold. The afternoon dimmed earlier than it should have, the sky thickening into a hard grey that pressed low over the town. Ronan felt the change before he saw it, the air turning dense, metallic on the tongue. He lifted a bundle of split firewood onto his shoulder and took the familiar path toward Mariah's house, his steps steady, unhurried. When he reached the yard, he stopped. The door stood ajar. No smoke rose from the chimney. Ronan set the wood down and knocked once. There was no answer. He pushed the door open. Mariah sat on the floor with her back against the bed frame. Jonas lay on the mattress, burning hot, his breathing shallow and fast, hair damp with sweat. Mariah held his hand in both of hers, her mouth pressed tight, as though any sound might shatter what little control remained. She looked up when Ronan entered. Her eyes were red, raw with panic. "You're here," she said. Not relief exactly, just recognition. Ronan laid his hand on Jonas's forehead. The heat was unmistakable. He took in the room in a single glance. The cooled pot of water, the damp cloth set aside, the stove not yet lit. Outside, the wind began to rise, testing the walls. "How long?" he asked. "Since noon," Mariah said. "I was going to town, but the weather turned too fast." The words broke at the end. It was the first time Ronan had seen her cry, silent tears slipping free. Ronan straightened. "I'll go." "No," Mariah said, rising instinctively. "The storm. I know the way," he replied. "Light the stove. Keep him warm." He pulled on his coat and took the saddlebags from the hook. He did not wait. When he opened the door, the wind struck like a blow, snow driving sideways. Mariah followed him to the threshold and stopped. "Ronan," he turned. Their eyes met without distance. "I'll be back," he said. Not a promise. Just a fact stated as firmly as it could be. The door closed. The storm swallowed him within seconds. Maria turned back and lit the stove with shaking hands. She wrapped Jonas in blankets, laid cool cloths on his brow, whispered words without shape. Outside, the storm broke fully. Snow whirling blind, wind pounding the walls as if testing their resolve. Ronan bent into the gale, leading the horse step by step. Snow rose to his knees. Gusts cut his face raw. He did not stop. Every turn lived in his memory. He thought of past winters, of learning not to arrive late. Night fell hard by the time he reached town. The clinic light was still burning. Ronan knocked once and did not wait. The doctor grabbed his coat and bag and went with him at once. No questions. The road was erased when they returned, but they pressed on. Maria heard hooves before she saw them. She opened the door and the wind lashed her face. Ronan helped the doctor down and handed her the bag. Fever medicine, the doctor said. Keep him warm. Don't let him sink into deep sleep. He worked quickly. Powder mixed with water. Cloths changed. Fire kept steady. Time stretched thin as wire. Near dawn, Jonas's breathing slowed. The heat eased. Maria folded over the bed, arms around her son, tears breaking free at last. When she looked up, Ronan had already pulled on his coat. You, she began. He's better, Ronan said. I'll check the path before the snow deepens. He stepped out and closed the door. He did not wait for thanks. He did not wait for daylight. Maria stood with her hand on the doorframe, long after he was gone. Outside, the storm still raged. But inside, a life had been held by feet that did not hesitate, and by a man who left in silence. Jonas slept deeply now, breathing steady. Maria sat beside him, counting the rise and fall of his chest. The storm refused to break. The oil lamp trembled. She trimmed the wick, stretching small tasks to keep fear from returning. Ronan had not come back. She turned the hourglass, watched the grains fall, turned it again. At last, the waiting became unbearable. She pulled on her coat, paused at Jonas's door, hesitated, then stepped outside. The wind cut her face like needles. The path vanished almost at once. Ronan's tracks were gone. She followed memory alone, counting steps, recalling bends, broken roots. Her breath burned. "Ronan," she called. The wind tore the word away. She pressed on, stumbled, fell, rose again. Tears froze on her cheeks. For the first time, she did not straighten her back. "Ronan," she whispered. "I'm here." The wind eased briefly, just long enough for another sound to reach her. Footsteps, uneven but sure. A figure emerged, blurred, then clear. Ronan stood there, coat heavy with snow, shoulders pitched forward. "Maria," he called. She moved toward him, stopped a few steps away. "You shouldn't," he began. "Don't," she said. "I was afraid to accept, afraid to need. But I couldn't lose you out here and stay inside." Ronan stood still, eyes open, unguarded. "You called my name," he said quietly. She nodded. She held out her hand. Ronan took it, warm and steady. They turned back together. At the porch, Maria faced him. "Thank you," she said. "Not for saving a life. For staying," he nodded. Inside, she closed the door and leaned against it for a brief second. Ronan stood nearby, coat dripping. "Sit," she said. He did. She removed his coat, dried his arms, movements slow and sure. She brought out the coat he had once left behind. "Stand!" She placed it on his shoulders, buttoned it carefully. "That day," she said, "I said no. I remember. Today, I want you to wear it." "Thank you." The stove crackled. Jonas breathed evenly. Maria set the kettle on. This time, she placed the cup into Ronan's hand. Their fingers touched. "You can stay in here," she said. "I accept," he replied. Outside, the storm moved on. Inside, something once set down in the snow had been placed by choice. Morning did not arrive all at once. It came in layers, first a thinning of the dark, then a pale wash of light at the edge of the windows, and finally the quiet certainty that the storm had passed. Snow lay thick and clean across the world, smoothing every hard line. Maria woke at the table, her head resting on her folded arms. The kettle had long gone cold. She lifted her face slowly, disoriented for a breath, then remembered. Jonas, Ronan. She stood at once and crossed the room. Jonas slept deeply. Color returned to his cheeks, his breathing slow and even. Relief loosened something in her chest she had held tight for days. She turned and found Ronan standing at the window, watching the pale morning. He had washed his face and hands, his hair still damp. His coat hung neatly by the stove. He did not speak when she approached. He simply shifted to give her room to see. The path was buried, the fences half lost. The mountain softened into something almost gentle. "He's better," she said. "He will be," Ronan replied. They stood side by side, close enough that their shoulders brushed. Neither moved away. The closeness felt earned now, not accidental. Mariah exhaled slow and full. "You can stay today," she said, as if granting herself permission. Ronan inclined his head. "I'd like that." They worked without planning it. Ronan cleared snow from the door and split wood. Mariah cooked what little remained in the cupboard, stretching it with care. When Jonas woke, he asked for Ronan before asking for food. Ronan lifted him gently, careful of his warmth, and carried him to the table. They ate porridge thin but hot. Jonas talked between bites, the fever already fading into memory. Outside, the town remained distant, unreachable for now. By midday, the sky cleared into a brittle blue. The silence felt different from before, not empty but held. Mariah noticed small things, the way Ronan paused before entering Jonas's room, the way he asked before taking another log, the way he looked to her when decisions were needed, even small ones. And she noticed herself too, how she no longer flinched when he stood close, how she did not rush to fill the quiet. In the afternoon, Jonas slept again, exhausted but safe. Mariah and Ronan sat at the table, hands wrapped around warm cups. "People will still talk," Mariah said, not accusing, just stating what was. Ronan nodded. "They always do. I won't hide," she continued, "but I won't offer explanations either. Nor should you." She studied him, searching for the edge of expectation she had learned to guard against. She found none. "I don't know what this is yet," she said. Ronan met her gaze. "Then we don't name it." The answer settled easily between them. When evening came, the sky blushed pale pink, then deepened toward violet. Ronan rose and reached for his coat. Mariah watched him. Surprised by the flicker of disappointment she did not try to bury. "The path's still deep," she said. "I can stay another night," he replied, not assuming. She nodded once. That night Jonas insisted Ronan tell a story. Ronan chose a simple one, about a horse that learned the way home by stars. Jonas fell asleep before it ended. Mariah listened from the doorway, her chest warm with something that had no sharp edges. Later, when the house settled into night, Mariah laid a blanket on the far side of the bed and gestured. Ronan paused. "Only if you're sure," he said. "I am." They lay with space between them, not touching. The fire's glow breathing across the room. Sleep came slowly. At some point, Mariah woke and found Ronan sitting up, staring at nothing. "What is it?" she whispered. "Habit," he said. "Waking before dawn." She reached out and rested her hand over his, steadying. He exhaled and lay back down. Morning would come again. This time, it felt like something they would meet together, without hurry, without fear.